Hello, hello, hello. So we have a very exciting conversation for everyone out there today. I have a guest coming on that I'm gonna invite jump on with me in a few, letting you guys begin to settle in. And today's discussion is going to be on all things the inner child, which those of us who live in the States might be knowing / celebrating Mother's Day here. So what better day than to talk about the child within each of us, the inner child, in terms of honoring our own inner children, especially those of us who are showing up for our own external children. So what better day than today to talk about all things inner child. So those of us who are not here in the States and not celebrating Mother's Day, still important, definitely part of our healing journey. So the individual that I'm going to have on with me today is someone really early on in my own journeys here in the whole virtual sphere. He and I connected and began to really think and do some work around inner child together, and he actually has now turned his own healing journey into an incredible platform that some of you might already be familiar with. Maybe some of you have already even been featured on it, which is Inner Child Chats. So obviously I'm giving it away for those of you who are familiar with his account, who's going to be jumping on with me today. But Nate is coming on, and we're going to have a discussion about all things inner child, when he came to be aware that his inner child was wounded, the work he's done, and of course the beautiful work that he is putting out into the world now. So I am going to go ahead and grab Nate. If you just give me 1 second. All right. We are connecting in. Give him a second to join. Oh, I think I hear him.
We did it.
We did it. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. This is my first time going live, so I didn't know quite how to do it, but I did it.
You did it. You did it. That's awesome. It's funny too, because even though I've requested people on, every time I do it, I'm like, wait a minute, which little icon is it? So we learn together, Nate. We learn together. Anyway, welcome. Thank you for spending this time with us today. It means a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. So honored to be here.
Of course, of course. So talk to me. Like I kind of said, I don't know if you heard your intro. I was hoping we could talk a little bit about just inner child in general, how you came to be aware of this concept, kind of when the aha moment happened, if there was one, or gradual, and then of course what evolved you into really putting out the incredible impactful work you're doing, whether it's in the form of inner child chats or the webinar and just all the beautiful work that you're putting out in the world, helping impact and touch everyone else's inner child. So just starting, tell us a little bit about kind of your own journey of inner child work.
Thank you. Yeah, so I had quite the complex childhood, lot of trauma, and I was in a heavily religious, inundated environment where there wasn't a lot of access to appropriate care, and so a lot of my life was spent centering myself around how to make the insides of me match the doctrine outside of me, and that does not do well with trauma. And so in my early 30s, I had what I call now my rebirth, but as a nervous breakdown. And at that time, I'd already been in therapy for about 13 years. And in that process, I was exposed to trauma therapy for the first time, where the therapist that I met in my outpatient center had all of these initials after their names, like all of these credentials. And so it was the first time I had really been exposed to appropriate care, which is when I heard about the inner child and I heard about all of these different modalities that work to heal trauma. So several years later, I'm building my life, and I have this very specific experience where I recognize that life as I know it is not going to be the same. A lot of my relationships were shifting. There was kind of like my detox of so much that I realized I had to let go of in order to live a healthy, grounded life. And during that time, I found a box of all of my childhood photos. And prior to that, any inner child work that I did was almost like, hurry up, let's do this, let's rescue this kid, I got to get this over with. Because as the therapist would explain to me, this is how this works. And the first time I heard about inner child therapy, he explained the whole process, and I said, okay. But I was in such a dire need to hurry and get those feelings inside of me out. That's all I wanted, was the immediate release of, make this feeling go away. So after several rounds of him explaining inner child therapy, the very first time he said, okay, are you ready to bring the child in the room? And I was like, yeah, bring that piece of shit in here. And it was like, wait, what? And I still had this understanding that I want to get rid of the inner child. I still didn't quite understand, this is a part of you that needs to be nourished and have a balanced, beautiful, sacred relationship with, because of what they've carried in your story. I think the first step for so many of us is to say, I want them to go away. I want them gone from my existence right away. So after a few years of here and there of inner child therapy, some deep EMDR, a lot of grounding work, when I had this moment alone, I was in my home in Denver, and I found this huge stack of pictures of me that had a bunch of childhood photos and teenage photos. And I had this thought where I just thought, if all of the relationships around me are fading and none of the core trauma work has even fully liberated me to feel comfortable in my skin still, I have to establish a relationship with this kid. I have to start to understand these stories, and I have to establish a better relationship with myself, because all of this stuff around me keeps changing. It keeps fading, and I can't keep adjusting to try and, again, match the inside of me to the outside of me. So one night I took all of my pictures and I lined them up in order from kindergarten up until 32 years old, which was 10 years ago when I had the nervous breakdown. And there were 3 rows of photos on my wall in my apartment. And then I printed off every quote, every musing, every poem that had ever meant something really valuable to me. And I printed them all off on separate sheets of paper. And I lined all of those pictures with those quotes. Every night for a month, I would close the curtains to my apartment. I would play classical music and I would light candles. And I would say those quotes out loud. I would put my hand on, say it out loud, and then apply it to whichever story or whichever picture made sense. And so all of a sudden, I'm like really visualizing this young boy. And I'm finally able to take Mary Oliver's quote of The Journey, her poem of The Journey, and apply it to these parts of me that have this horrific pain and all of this confusion. And all of the trauma therapy before was so helpful in building that foundation. But again, all of that work was out of urgency to hurry and heal, that it didn't feel like I had the actual connection to the inner child. I did that for 30 days. Only 2 friends ever saw it when they would come, and they would just kind of stand in awe. It was 2 guys that I was in a men's group with, and they would just stand and they would ask a couple of questions of just like, but wait, they're all you. Yes. So they all have a story. Yes. But you're saying they're still you? Yes. So it was kind of this thing where I was understanding it myself for the first time, but also recognizing your relationship with yourself has got to get better. That is the only sure guarantee that you're going to enjoy life better from this day forward, regardless of what's ever happened to you. This is where the gold is. And it worked. It worked. Yeah. That 30 days, it changed my life, or what I now call the sacred self, where I understood all of those parts of me have a story. And all of those stories get activated all the time. But when my 6-year-old story gets activated, and at the time, say I'm 36, he's lived that story for 30 years. And so that tension and that intensity that I feel is 30 years of history of him feeling disconnected from me. bringing him into awareness and saying to that 6-year-old, I'm 36. I've got this. I actually have the skills and the tools to navigate this. You are okay. You're in my presence. We're good. And it's unbelievable what that does. It's just reconnecting that self.
Absolutely, Nate. I just want to pause here because you're saying, I mean, first and foremost, thank you for so vulnerably sharing so much of your very personal experience. And in that, you're illustrating really important parts, right? So the first piece that I think is incredibly important for us to realize is that we all, like you're speaking very beautifully, we all have that inner childlike space within each of us. You know, we are carrying those experiences. For some of you, that might look like instances of abuse, you know, kind of the things that we typically think of. For some of us, though, it might be not what we typically think of in terms of the big T, trauma, abuse. It might be, you know, underlying ways that our physical, our emotional, our spiritual needs, you know, weren't honored and weren't met in childhood. You said something also really important and poignant, which is that we adapt. We're incredibly adaptive creatures. So while this was all happening in childhood, right, while we were either just not having our needs honored or met, or even furthermore, while some of us were actually being violated or being abused, you know, that happens at an early space. And we adapt. We find a way, because we are, so a couple of you very beautifully in the comments are talking about how brave and how resilient we are. Those of us, a lot of us might not feel it, but we are all living with adaptations that we made, doing the best we can to cope with these environments very early on. However, we still carry that inner child. There can be stories of different developmental periods, to use your language, right, that we are living in. And to speak to your point, that's why when we're activated, when we're emotionally activated, when we're triggered, if you will, it actually feels that big because it is that big for us. Another point you're making, which is beautiful, is that for many of us, what we're feeling in these moments is that accumulation of either unmet needs. So what some of us could look or feel like in adulthood is consistently angry and resentful because maybe we have not shown up or had our needs met over time. Or maybe it's that it was part of ourselves from those earlier time periods that suffered the wounding that's coming up. Doesn't go away. Our goal in adulthood is to come up with some new tools to navigate it differently. So you very beautifully illustrated that in your own journey, right? The resistance that a lot of us feels, the avoidance of the hardship. When we heal and a lot of this comes to the surface, it's incredibly painful. For a lot of us, we might rather not know. And we might rather just continue to live in that avoidance. But it's there, it's real. And it's an important, I think, space to honor because for us, those feelings are valid. And many of us might never have had an environment that allowed us to honor ourselves in this way.
And I love, you keep saying the word valid. When if you're 36 years old and you have an experience with, I talk about this a lot in the webinar, your partner's pulling away and it brings out an unbelievable amount of attachment and just terror and fear. That's your 6-year-old who's having a response from something that happened as a kid. And so what we do is we shame ourselves and we ignore it because that war is going on within ourselves and we're not able to say, I need to go inward and navigate what story is being told right now. What is so intense about this so that I can use my 36-year-old emotions and maturities to calm and settle that 6-year-old. And then it's being able to say, are these emotions valid? Yes, for the 6-year-old they are. Mm-hmm. But if we ignore it and shame it, that 6-year-old feels that. And so that story continues to be inflamed. And again, it's that distance of 30 years of history that it's lived inside of your body. And speaking of validation, I think that we often dismiss how much we have to offer today for our inner child. Oftentimes in my coaching, I'll ask someone, do you feel like you have the tools that could help navigate your child's story better than they can? And someone will say, no, you always have the tools. As an adult, you have so much more skill to understand and process. The fear is thinking about and experiencing the pain and the vulnerability again. But the tool set and skills are natural as adults to know how to navigate something better than a child can. So even validating that and understanding as you go back and feeling safe and secure, but that connection being offered with current day tools and understanding.
Yeah, 100%. I love adding that reminder to people. And as far as I see it, Nate, I don't know if you would agree, I have yet to find anything that is as great of a teacher outside of a lived experience, meaning a lot of our fear lives up here. So it's going to really take those moments of either just sitting in something that's uncomfortable. I'm going to really simplify this to prove to that inner child that with our adult, we can now tolerate that. You know, maybe in childhood we couldn't. Maybe we were living in an overwhelming home and we didn't have the support of caregivers who could help us to feel safe, right? So maybe that was true for us at one time. However, what's true for us now is a new reality, a reality like you're speaking very beautifully, where we can learn some new tools. However, we don't really believe it until we do it, until we tolerate that uncomfortable feeling, or until we do the new thing. Maybe we reach out for support, or we do some, nervous system regulation, in terms of breathing. Until we do it and prove to our inner child that we are actually safe in a new way now, we're not really going to believe it. All of this just lives up here for me as well in theory until we practice it. And unfortunately, there's no way around the discomfort of doing something new for the first time for any of us. So while we might be convinced that we just don't know and we just can't handle this, the reality for many of us, most of us, is that we can. We just have to show ourselves. And whether or not that means, having the supportive friend around, when we need to not feel alone, or, I'm not saying we have to do this as an island by ourselves. But you're right. In adulthood, we have many more tools, but it's going to feel new. So it's going to feel different. And for some of us, it's going to mean tolerating some uncomfortable feelings. I know I got very good at, and you would hear my family describe me as this growing up, as nothing bothers Nicole. In reality, so like you, Nate, my insides and my appearance outside did not match what was going on inside, because internally, I felt completely overwhelmed. But externally, I appeared fine. So again, there's a lot, I think I know this, I've lived this. So finding that match within myself of how to be connected to my insides when I'm not fine and how to regulate that was very new for me. I was again, as our expectation told us to be one time, but now, in adulthood, for me at least, I came to find many negative fallouts of disconnecting and dissociating. And I came to realize that I could show up new in a new way. I did have the tools like you're speaking of. And it wasn't until I did it that I really convinced myself on the deeper level that I can handle more. So let me ask you, you've a couple of times now mentioned your own inner child. You've now evolved into being, kind of a helper in this new way, and what that's been like for you. And, all of this, the new workshop, I know that the webinar that you're putting out there is amazing. My experience, my inner child is often challenged showing up in this way virtually, even in teaching the healing.
Yeah. Morning of the webinar, I went for a 2-hour walk to just calm everything down and say, I had to have a conversation with him that said, hey, you're safe. Keep in mind, I'm 42. I'm going to be talking a lot today to help other people connect with themselves. And I just want you to know that I'm fully in charge. And this is a very safe experience, and we're not going to do anything that's going to harm you. And if you feel afraid, just remember that I'm right there. I'm right there with you, and that there's nothing that's going to happen that's going to cause you any harm, because I'm taking care of everything. And that's experience for an inner child to feel like their story's being exposed without an actual connection to the adult self. And so I'm very active. I had a beautiful moment this morning in my meditation with my inner child, thinking about this live. And I always go back and say, I'm going to be talking about your story today. And in that process, you may feel an uprising as other people say things or do things. That's your story. But just keep in mind, I'm the keeper of it. I'm the narrator of it. You're safe here with me, and no one's going to have access to you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think for me too, I relate to that, Nate, so much. A big wound of my inner child, historically growing up with a very emotionally unavailable mother, and really family in and of itself, loneliness, feeling alone. One of my core inner, wounds of my own inner child is this desperate need or want to be seen, heard, kind of considered, yet also feeling very, very deeply in opposition of those things, not feeling seen, not feeling heard, not feeling considered, essentially feeling really alone in a core way. So similar to you, my inner child isn't used to showing itself and showing her feelings to any adult, even the adult self that is me. So that's really vulnerable for me. And then of course, so what I was alluding to earlier is this whole space of the virtual world. I mean, even seeing the numbers of people who are viewing us right now, or, this is incredibly terrifying. So a lot of times we can be at odds within ourselves. I share my example because on the one hand, all I desperately want is to be seen, heard, considered, right? On the other hand, that's so uncomfortable for me because I'm not used to it, because I'm used to being alone and within myself, and not really comfortable with being vulnerable to one other person, let alone, right, however many zeros go on the end of that one. So for me, my inner child is challenged more or less on the daily. And I like to use that as an example because I think a lot of us share, that loneliness or, that deep desire to be seen. However, when we find ourselves in the context, even if it's in just a romantic relationship with a partner that we feel safe with, there might be that deeper part of ourselves that doesn't yet know how to show up, to be seen, to be heard, and to be acknowledged. So I think it's beautiful. I do as well make it an effort, to check in with my inner child, to be aware that she's there, especially when, I find myself in these situations where I know other people are going to be gazing upon her, because there's a big part of me that isn't super comfortable with it.
Yeah. I love that you said that. And this is how I explain to people, when we are not connected to our inner child, and in current day, we experience something that feels threatening, triggering in any way, if we're not willing to embrace the story that's being activated, it's like putting the child in front of that story and saying, here, you deal with this. Connecting to the inner child, affirming them, reparenting them, takes them and safely moves them back out of the way and puts them behind us, says, no, this is an adult problem. I'm the adult. I'll take care of this. And what I always want to help people understand is that when you're navigating this, any resistance that comes on strong, I cannot stress enough, trauma therapy is powerful. It's great. Like my particular modality was a combination of EMDR and IFS for the actual reprocessing trauma. But we're still responsible to build a relationship with the inner child. And that's the piece that I felt like was missing in my therapy, where it was this constant rescue, go back, rescue. But I never actually had a relationship with that part of myself. I never actually, the stories were kind of untold, but with the intent to hurry and feel better and hurry and heal. Developing the relationship with the child has been unbelievable. For me, that was after I got a lot of the trauma reprocessed and out of the way. But then just seeing him and understanding him and being able to see certain things that get triggered or that I respond to, and be able to say, that is 13-year-old Nate. That is so clear that is 13-year-old Nate. I take a deep breath. I validate his experience. I wink and I remind him that I've got him covered, and it goes away. That work takes time, but it's just learning to have that relationship where you both feel safe with one another. Part of it's introducing yourself to the inner child and being able to say, hey, I know you're afraid. I know that in some ways you don't even see me. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I've got a lot that I want to do for you. So as you get more comfortable with me, we're going to have a great relationship.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's so beautiful. And I couldn't agree more. So those listening, especially if you have a trauma history, helping professionals are incredibly important. There are beautiful modalities out there now. I'm always talking about them: somatic work, EMDR. I saw a question come in, eye movement desensitization. And so it's, kind of a back and the forth. There's ways to heal that are supportive, and there are a lot of trauma practitioners out there doing incredible work. However, I think you're illustrating a beautiful point, which is daily life, right? Living and honoring that child that you are going to bring home with you outside of that therapy room. So in my opinion, it is always an and conversation. Go seek all of the different types of support that is necessary in your healing. I know I did in the past, and there might come a time in the future where I do. And we really have to evolve to honoring the reality that we're still living with our child, day in and day out. And it is really about cultivating that ongoing conversation. And I love that you pointed out, in the beginning, it might feel weird. It might feel silly. You might not want to do it. You might not even know what you're doing in the beginning. And that's okay. None of us got here overnight. I'm still on my journey of reparenting and of showing up for my inner child and of cultivating that safe, secure relationship. It will be a lifetime one. There is no end, but what is really important are those daily conversations, because our needs change too. They change daily, day by day, depending on what context are happening. Of course, a lot of us are thrust into this new reality, with COVID. That's going to challenge our inner child in a different way, sometimes developmentally, as we reach new milestones in life, as we age, right? The needs of our inner child is always with us and is always changing. So if we think it's a one and done dialogue, and you very beautifully, again, are illustrating why, me included, I want the pathway to feel better quick. That's what I was modeled in my family. We all like to immediately relieve whatever is uncomfortable in our lives. And we get really good at that. However, right, there's only so much we can run from, because that doesn't go anywhere. These wounds follow us. And like I said, depending on what's happening for us externally, our inner child could come alive at sometimes more so than others. So it's really about cultivating that daily conversation with ourselves. Even if we don't know how to begin and we feel like we're stabbing in the dark, I think the first level of beginning is just acknowledgement. Because for some of us, we've fought so hard and we've resisted so much this part of ourself, that for some of our inner children, the relief of just being seen is healing in and of itself. So anyone out there listening, in terms of how to begin, I think, and I'm interested in what your suggestion would be in terms of the start of this sort of healing journey. But I've gained an incredible amount of healing myself and seen many others by just the acknowledgement, by just listening to a conversation like this, and by just kind of observing in your life and seeing for yourself. I'm not going to convince you that you have this inner child. See, and the more we tune in my opinion, the more we notice this part of ourselves. And if we shift out, for someone who's felt very shameful of, maybe the reactions, the way we used to cope in those moments, for some of us, just acknowledging where this place is coming from and where these wounds are coming from before we even change it is healing in and of itself. So beyond that, I'm wondering what you would say as a suggestion, if we have listeners out there that are resonating, that are maybe starting to identify the presence of an inner child in their own world. What would you suggest would be just a kind of a way to get moving in a direction of healing?
I would say I use the 4 pillars of communication when it comes to an inner child, and that's curiosity, patience, kindness, and compassion. We get really confused about wanting to demand the inner child give us a response, and what we forget, their story is over and it's completed. They live with that history, so what they've experienced is there and can be activated on a day-to-day basis. Our job is to go back and provide safety and security with the lens of curiosity and compassion. We can't demand things from them. They can't do that for us. That's not how that will work. So I would say to take ownership of self and be able to say, I want to be really curious, compassionate, kind, as I look at this, and be really patient to observe what stories are being activated in me on a day-to-day basis, where I just thought I was crazy. I thought I was too much. I thought I was intense. Turns out I'm having a very normal response to something that happened a long time ago. And it's reconnecting to that in the safest way possible and validating that experience. So breathe deeper and acknowledge that as I stand whole today, that I've carried a lot inside of my body that I've been disconnected to, and connecting to that is going to give me the freedom to be my sacred self and enjoy being whole as a unit. Can't say enough how scary and confusing the work is as you begin. There are so many skilled practitioners that specialize in inner child work. I think that that's imperative to get the proper help if that helps to say this is who and what the inner child is. But again, if you can just be curious about what are these untold stories, like what are these reactions that I'm having on a day-to-day basis, and how do I move back into myself in a way that validates that experience in order for that story to no longer be activated. Once that connection happens, you will see over time, you're standing day to day in a present moment and something happens, and you pause and think, this would have activated the hell out of me a year ago or 2 years ago. Because you have that connection to that part of yourself, the intensity is just no longer there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so beautiful. I'm not even going to add, much more to that, except just a constant reminder. I talk about this a lot when I talk about ego work, Nate, which is that it's not a light switch, right? So there might even be moments where we do feel a return of some level of activation if our resources are low, if we're not sleeping, if we're stressed. So again, the cliche that we all love to hate, healing isn't linear, meaning once I attain a stage and maybe I'm trudging along and those things aren't really activating anymore, there might come a time where it does in the future. And again, distancing ourselves, not carrying the shame, it doesn't mean we're regressing. Healing isn't linear. We don't just kind of notch onto another stage and never, kind of shift back. I know I don't. While I've done a lot of healing around my core, childhood wounds and narratives, there's still moments where I feel that some degree, maybe not as extreme, but still some degree of activation. So I think that's just a worthy of note endpoint as well, that there's a lot of, kind of work that we do in these moments. And even in the beginning stages, right, we might feel the inclination to be activated, to do the thing we always do. It doesn't just go away. Now that you've heard this conversation, now that we understand it, all of this is still living in our bodies. So our bodies are still going to try to drive those older reactions. So not to get alarmed or concerned or to shame ourselves, because I know for a very long time, events would still happen and my nervous system would go into that overactivation, even as I was practicing breaking that pattern, even as I was practicing a new response in those moments. I was living in this purgatory in a sense where my insides were still old self, totally over, reacting to what's happening, while I was very much trying to, kind of grit my teeth and show up in a new way. And then of course that began to release a little more and a little more, but I still have moments where that old activation comes. So that's a very long way of really honoring that there isn't that upward trajectory. We don't just kind of clip our milestones and not go back. So if that's happening, anyone that is listening, it does not mean you're moving in the wrong direction or it's not working. This is just the practice of, kind of learning new responses consistently. And it's quite difficult. So tell us all, Nate, because you do, similar to me, you show up every day on Instagram and you're putting out, I know you've mentioned the webinar, so definitely tell folks, if they're interested in, hopping on one of those, where and when and all of that good stuff, but also where can we find you on the day-to-day, because you're doing inner child work in your own healing, and you also have an amazingly cool, in my opinion, Instagram account. So tell us where we can find you.
Thank you. So on Instagram, I'm up here as Nate_Postlethwaite. My passion project is Inner Child Chats, which is inner_child_chats. And that's project started about a year ago, where just one night I kept thinking, how do I facilitate other people understanding the messages that their child needs to hear to help that conversation? It's been so beautiful. We're at almost 200 stories being told, but that community has grown so fast. And it's just a really pure experience of people for the first time saying, I had no idea that other people felt this way. And so you submit your picture, I send guidelines of this is what we're doing to tell your story. We do it in a very safe way. And then you have this whole community of other people chiming in and saying, I see you. Wow, I really resonate with that similar experience. I'm so proud of you. Thank you so much for sharing. And early on in that process, I had someone who responded to me and she said, I have lived invisible most of my life because my CPTSD is so severe. And she said, after sharing my story and having all these other people acknowledge my inner child and embrace her for the first time in my life, my symptoms have decreased by a solid 50% today. She said, I've gone hours at a time without having anxiety for the first time. Wow. Just telling those stories, like having that awareness out there and connecting other people who understand that language and feel the same way, and just cheering each other on to say, I get your story, I understand it. So anyways, the link to the webinar is going to be on Inner Child Chats and my Instagram account, which is Nate_Polstowait. My coaching website is storyconnectcoaching.com. We're booked out for a few months right now, but definitely have like a wait list and inquiry. And we're also working on groups there to make sure that our work meets as many people as possible.
Incredible. Incredible. Thank you for sharing all that. Thank you for being a light in this world, Nate. I mean, it's been truly, I could probably spend another 10 minutes talking just about you and our relationship, and just my heart has been with you this whole time and will continue to be. And you're a light in this world, you and little Nate and all of the pieces within you. So thank you for the way you show up in the world. I know it's definitely, you and I always are supporting each other, not always easy, but here we are, and the work you're putting out there, like I said, is so impactful. I'm just even watching all of the comments during this. I hope you get a chance to go through yourself. Really impactful, even just hearing you speak today. So keep shining that light, and my love is always with you and my support is always with you. And thank you for spending time with me today.
Thank you. Can we close with this? I want you, this dawned on me this morning. You and I had breakfast almost exactly 2 months ago. I went into quarantine 48 hours later when I left LA and came back to San Diego. You were one of the last people I've hugged. So I've held on to that, like you and 3 other people. Like
That's incredible.
I've had no people contact. So I love that. I kept thinking like all of the rich encounters I had right before quarantine are what helped me get through. So I wanted to end with that because it's meant a lot to me.
I love that you said that, Nate, because when I put up our picture to kind of let everyone know that you and I were doing this, and I had a moment too of reminiscing those that went, oh, right, human, me next to them physically. So I will revisit that memory, and I hope that we can coordinate and COVID lifts and we can have another hug to bookend it soon.
Can't wait.
Awesome. And I apologize, guys. I'm seeing that there was a little bit of delay in the technology. I'm not sure what's happening. So thank you, Nate, for trudging through and making this work. And you have a wonderful day. And everyone, thank you all for tuning in.
Thanks, Nicole.